I think it's really hard to talk about Silent Hill 2 because there is no clear way to talk about it without spoiling the entire game. So I'm going to do this in two different sections. The first section is going to be a real general conversation, and then the second section is going to be my real deep thoughts about the experience from start to finish. If you like psychological horror, if you enjoy being afraid, if you enjoy being scared, if you enjoy feeling like the diabolical presence of nightmares is around every corner, then my God, Silent Hill 2 is a must purchase for you, and I think you will love it from start to finish. If you like games that are actually deeper than that go beyond that thrill, which there's nothing wrong with, and you want something that's really going to shape your life, potentially change your entire life through the medium of video games, Silent Hill 2 is the game for you. If you're afraid to really go deep into emotion and feelings, if you're really afraid of scary games, this may not be for you. But I will tell you that having experienced it for myself for 16 hours, I am horror averse. Horror movies, horror games, scary games, they terrify me. I don't enjoy them. And yet getting through all of that to arrive at the revelations of this game was worth every single jump scare or nightmare or a change of underwear that I had to undergo. In my humble opinion, Silent Hill 2 may easily be one of the best video games I have ever played, and certainly one of the best video games ever made. And no, that ain't just glazing. Silent Hill 2 touches on a lot of different emotional pieces. There are so many emotional beats in Silent Hill 2 that will leave you feeling broken and empty. It will also challenge you to consider the beauty of life, what it means to look after a loving family member, a sick family member, what it means to journey through life and death. It's a very human story. The music, of course, is phenomenal. Both the ambient tracks that you experience when you're wandering around, terrified, and some of the pieces that are purely just rock ballads. It's actually incredible how diverse this soundtrack and this soundscape really, truly are. Obviously, for those of you that have played through Silent Hill 2 and you know it intimately, you know that there have been some revisions and some changes to the soundtrack, etc., etc., etc. But for today's video, I'm going to be focusing on the Silent Hill 2 remake. There are several things that are really cool about this game, and musicality is one of them. Listen to how terrifying the soundscape is while wandering around the Woodside apartment building. What do we have there? Why is that so terrifying? Well, a few different things. For starters, we have a repetitive pattern. Ba-do, ba-do. That step down, da-do. That's primal stuff. If you've ever seen Jaws, it's very similar to that. And on top of that, we have this industrial sound. We have this feeling of iron clashing with iron on top of itself. We have this sensation of an inorganic entity approaching us or wandering through this empty space. There's a constant high string drone throughout this entire little corner. And around it, we have this ba 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 ba. So we're using rhythm and we're using sustained notes to create an inherent musical sense of tension. Then on top of that, you add this other element. These little details create so much discomfort. It is an oppressive track. And that is one of the things about Silent Hill 2 that is so phenomenal. Is that no matter where you turn, you constantly feel like you're wearing some sort of a straitjacket, whether it's made of fog or whether it's made of old apartments. You always feel constricted, claustrophobic, uncomfortable, like there's a heavy weight pressing on your chest. And you can't do anything but continue to move through that experience to hopefully get to the next save point, the only place where you feel even remotely comfortable. Because enemies are going to come through the doors. They're not going to wait. They're not going to care if you go into a building because they're coming after you. Brookhaven Hospital is another prime example. So what you have there is a drone, much like we have with the apartments, but what you end up having it almost feels like it's in the lower piano. And in the lower piano, we're constantly working with a feeling of discomfort and of a rich, warm sound that at the lower half of the piano really tends to represent something uncomfortable. It's very low. It almost feels like the tone gets muddied. And here what it feels like is that we're essentially taking music that would have been written by, say, a guy like John Cage or something. We're taking real world environments, whether it be a sheet of metal or what have you, and creating music out of that. Now, it's not to say that it's going to be a melodic piece of music, but it's going to be something that will inevitably cause a sense of distress. It's very oppressive, and it feels dark, doesn't it? Listen. And if you really look at it, it's boom, bum, ba-doom, dum, dum, bum, ba-doom. That's the sound that comes across, right? Another example is the Toluca prison. You feel how that feels almost like breathing? What we end up with there is actually a piece of music that is essentially silence. This is a piece of silence that's built with sound. It's silence, but amplified, almost to the point that it feels like it's not there. It's silence, but with vocalism, with that breathing and that and it almost makes us feel like the environment is singing to us, even though technically that's not music. There's something really powerful also about actual sound that is made to feel like it's not there, like silence, even though it's not. It's almost like the world around you breathes and functions and is alive with breath, alive with a feeling, alive with a bubbling energy. So that comes across in the ambient music, right? Because it feels like it's silence, but it's actually not. It's a really, really masterful way to create an atmosphere that makes you feel like you're suffocating. Because we have silence, but not at the same time. We have the environment talking to us, but there's no music. And then, of course, we have the incredibly famous Akira Yamaoka's soundscape for this that is truly the music of this. Music only appears when we interact with other characters, or there's a revelation, or there's some sort of discomfort. Rarely is music actively playing in this. In fact, I would say that the score is somewhat devoid of music except for those key moments where it almost brings a sense of peace. It almost brings a sense of comfort. One of my favorite pieces from this soundtrack, and this is very, very well known for those that have played this before, but is true. It almost feels like we're picking up pace. We're starting from nothing into something. There's some sort of a clue that goes off in our brain in this music, the way that it starts slowly and it starts to add more and more layers. It's as if to say, oh, I see. There's something going on here. And then the piano, a somewhat prevalent instrument in this entire game. The way that we're arpeggiating here feels like we're spinning a little bit. We're spinning out. We're coming to a realization. And then we reset. big space. Some dissonance, some enharmonics. And then we're arpeggiating chords here. James suddenly starts twerking. And this viola really comes in, and this is the sound, whether it's a cello or a viola, but this is the sound of a man waking up to the truth of what's happening in Silent Hill, the truth of why he's there, the truth of what he has to uncover for himself, for a sense of closure. That piano almost is oppressing him, holding him back, holding him down as he tries to emerge out of that. But in the end, it's the piano that takes over and leads the charge. But then our main character comes back and says, no. This can't be true. I have to do good. I still have a chance to change my life. And there are so many other tracks that sound like this. It's a really interesting sound style. This mix of grunge, this mix of rock, this mix of almost pseudo-classical music. But really, I think ultimately the thing that really stood out to me are some of these ambient tracks that really make us feel like we can't breathe. It's a fascinating experience. And if you haven't ever played Silent Hill 2, boy, you really ought to do yourself the favor. So we're going to move over to the spoiler section now. So if you haven't played the game, I would suggest leaving. I have to say, this has been one of the most memorable gaming experiences probably of my entire life. And I know that that's like a big statement to make, and I do feel that about a lot of games, but in truth, Silent Hill 2 was one of the most relatable experiences I've ever played. There's something so honest about the fact that we are navigating grief throughout this entire journey, that we're navigating with characters that have to go through their own journeys to try to come to conclusions about why their lives have turned out the way they have. You know, I especially think of Angela. The fact that Eddie and Angela and Laura and Maria, to a lesser extent, of course, and obviously James, are all thrust upon Silent Hill is really interesting. And it's not dissimilar to how we deal with life every single day, where we're all living our own hardship and trying to navigate through it to exit our own Silent Hills. But the thing that really surprised me is, despite the fact that while I was streaming, someone decided to come into the chat and explain and spoil what happens with James and Mary, it was still worth seeing through. It was terrifying for me from start to finish. I have to say, this is probably one of the scariest games I've ever played. But I do believe that this game triumphs over any other horror game because it isn't just about the scares. And boy, there are so many of them, right? But it isn't about that. It's about the journey of going through that psychological world of James's mind, of navigating fidelity and the desire for sickness to be stripped away, to go back to a time when Maria was Mary, where that person was who he wanted, to go back to a time when Mary was well and he didn't do what he did. And the thought that's really been percolating around me is how human this story is. We started watching the Silent Hill movie because since playing this game, I've been really obsessed with it, with the IP in general. And I'm really looking forward to playing the original and 3 and 4, especially 3. And the thing that I've sort of was annoyed by is we see Pyramid Head and all these monsters that are featured in Silent Hill 2. And the thing is, we know that those are manifestations of James's psychology, of James's frustration, of the representation of Mary's sickness. Pyramid Head representing that guilt for snuffing her out. And so seeing those out of place felt so wrong because we reduced this wonderful, wonderful, terrifying villain of Pyramid Head into a movie monster. But you and I know that there's a depth to that that's unbelievable. I've been listening to the theme of Laura recently, at least the remake version. I think this is her first one, not the second one. I really think about that Laura is this beacon of possibility and hope for the rest of these characters, and that everyone interacts with her at one point. And despite the sadness and the depression and the angst and the fight that we're having to navigate this terrible, terrible, terrible experience of being in Silent Hill, here comes innocent Laura, who just wants to live the best life she can, who's already suffered too much at 8 years old. And listen to how this goes. You know, interestingly enough, the first half of this feels like Laura interacting with everybody. And then in this little corner here where there's no melody, that sounds like James, Angela, and Eddie. Their pain, their strife, they're trying to navigate this journey. But the melody is Laura. That bright quality in that melody, and in the way that there's this beautiful little harmony in it as well, symbolizes possibility, symbolizes hope for the future, symbolizes innocence almost. And then these heavy riffs, that's the danger, the oppression. That beautiful counter melody coming down here. And the thing about Laura is that Laura sees this place as just any other place. And despite everything we see, that we experience, we suffer, she doesn't see any of that. She's so pure. It's funny because during the game, you're like, oh, come on, Laura, what are you doing? But then as you start to unravel and understand that there's a purity in that I think really is great and a phenomenal use of that feeling of being young and being a child with that child simplicity that helps, I think, bring some degree of levity to an otherwise deeply unsettling and deeply depressing piece and game experience. And the thing about this, ultimately, is that this game is real. There are games like this that really lean on the reality of life, the fleetingness of life, the temporary, impermanent aspects of life. I think of James as a character, and I feel sorry for him. I don't think that James is truly a bad person. I don't think that what happened between him and Mary was evil. I think that James was sad and angry and frustrated. And anyone who's been a caretaker for someone who's sick and actively dying, it's really hard to process a lot of those emotions. And all your feelings that come up are valid. And trying to not feel guilty about certain feelings, or not to feel frustrated with the person because it's not their fault. And so that's what makes this game, I think, so profound. And if you played this when it first came out, that's incredible. I wish that I had taken the time back in the day to, the internet was different. I mean, the whole world was different back then, but I wish that I had known about this, because I feel like maybe it would have prepared me for my own journey that I had to experience with my father passing away. There are so many little things about this, whether it's Mary's letter, the hotel sequence, the conversation that Mary and James have in the good ending, I guess. A lot of those feelings are real and extremely relatable. And so that's why, to me, this goes above and beyond any other horror game I've ever seen or played. Because this is full of emotion. This is real life. This is the pain of growing up. This is the pain of living in this world. And Silent Hill 2 handles that pain with a shocking amount of grace and a shocking amount of heart that I didn't anticipate. Silent Hill 2 is one of the best games that has ever been made. It is a deeply engrossing, terrifying, and ultimately sad and tragic piece of video game media that reminds us of the fragility and complexity of this beautiful thing called life. It has left an indelible mark on me. It has been a cathartic and moving experience, almost validating some of the feelings I used to feel when my dad was sick. And it's encouraging to remind me to not take things for granted, to be appreciative of the life that I've been given, and to feel grateful that I don't ever have to visit Silent Hill. It was an incredible experience, and I will never forget it, to be honest with you. It is one of the best games I've ever played. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves. Bye.